Okay. It says I'm live. Maybe I am. Who knows? You never know with technology. It's amazing. Welcome to a rare Saturday morning, still Saturday morning, at least where I am, edition of Open Q&A. We got a theme today. The theme for today is going to be some career-oriented questions, mostly around Postgres, Postgres data-oriented career questions. And as it turns out, sort of my thinking behind like why these questions, why this week or whatever. Let me grab a little Joe, as they say. So the reason behind the questions this week was that I read a paper. I guess it came out about 2 weeks ago. I think by Andy Pavla and Michael Stonebreaker, who are two sort of database luminaries. I think most people know Stonebreaker is sort of the progenitor of Postgres way back in the day, back when it was at Berkeley, and then went on to serve in a series of mostly failed companies. But we'll get into that maybe in another video. Pavlo, brilliant dude out of CMU, Carnegie Mellon. I don't know why I call it that. Carnegie Mellon University. I believe runs the database group over there, professor over there. And they do a lot of interesting work, actually. One of the projects that they have worked on, I guess it's ongoing when school's in session, where they bring guest lecturers in to speak on database technology, usually like sort of deep internals, if you want a career in sort of writing database code, right? So you want to be like a Postgres hacker or whatever. So something like that. So he has been studying databases for years and years and years. Definitely enjoyed his work over the years. And the paper that they co-wrote this paper, which was basically a follow-up of a paper that was written, or an article, whatever, 20 years ago. And both had similar themes, which were basically, relational database technology has been kind of the dominant platform since the 70s. Since that time, we have seen other things come and go and come and go and come and go. And so let's sort of have a discussion on what some of those technologies were, the trade-offs that were involved, and what is likely to be the outcomes in the future. And I remember actually reading the original one, years ago, 20 years ago, probably, something along those lines. And it sort of had an impact on me, but not quite in the same way as this one. So the advantage of this paper for me reading it is like, well, I've lived the last 20 years. So this paper goes into things, like JSON being the hotness, right? So everybody needs a JSON database, document databases, in general, XML databases is a version of that. Also goes into like, well, the NoSQL movement and things like Hadoop. And, there was a point where I think people were like, damn, maybe we're not going to actually do, relational database anymore. Just throw it all in I don't know, they didn't call it a data lake and when Hadoop was first out, I don't know, it was the data trash bag. And then you'll write MapReduce queries in Erlang to get your data, fuck yourself, whatever, right? So like that was kind of the way that Hadoop came on the scene. And I mean, brilliant people working on a lot of stuff around there. Shout out like Cloudera of one company that I really did think there was a lot of smart people there working on various Hadoop oriented things. But they point out, like in this paper, they point out like, at the point of like the sort of height of Hadoop madness, Google internally, who was sort of the progenitor of Hadoop, like they basically had already moved on from Hadoop and said like, it's really doesn't work the way you'd like it to. And they'd gone on to like Bigtable and, and now, I mean, Google has its own Postgres fork, LOADB. So, they kind of come back in some way towards a relational model for some things. So it just sort of goes into that. And so over the last 20 years, right, like having lived through most of those things, it just sort of hits it a different way. In the first one, like if you tell me like, oh, you don't remember when like Pick was the database of choice and we all thought we were getting rid of relational and everyone's going to use like a Pick database. Like, okay, I mean, I like those stories are funny to me, I guess, or whatever. Like, but I didn't live through that. Like, I never ran a Pick database. So like, I don't know. It just doesn't hit in the same way. What is also interesting, I think, is so people, as you're working in your data career, I think people have a tendency to be concerned that the next new hot thing is going to actually replace whatever you have invested in over however long you've been in your career. And some of these questions today actually will touch on that. So I won't go too deep into that now, but I've always found a little bit humorous. So like I could read the paper from before and you look at it and you're like, well, obviously PIC wasn't going to replace the relational data model. Like whoever thought that was true? And then you turn around and you're like, oh my God, like what? We got JSON. We don't actually need to store data in tables anymore. Like everything is just a JSON blob and we index and blah, right? Whatever. Like people just get worked up about that stuff. And again, this paper kind of shows that, like, like you could just relax on that idea. It doesn't really work that way in the database industry. So I will put a link in the notes once this video is posted live to make it easy for you to find. The one I read was still in that horrendous, like 2-column PDF scientific notation-y style that people like to publish papers in. It's so awful. I don't know why. We do that, but that's how they do it. So whatever. It's definitely worth a read. Doesn't, it's not super long, but a very nice overview of the industry for the last 20 years or so. And some thoughts on some future ideas that are in there as well. So today I picked out some questions that are career oriented. Some of these are like two-parters. Only picked out like sort of 4 or maybe 6, depending on 7, I don't know, depending on what constitutes a particular question. But I might as well just go ahead and jump into the first one because it's so open-ended, which is basically like, what is a career path for a database administrator? And I like that question on some level. And it makes sense. I understand why people might ask me, when I was running the database team at OmniTI, we hired all different levels of talent. From folks like DePez worked for us at one point. So, I doesn't really get much better than that, right? But we also hired like sort of junior DBAs, fresh out of college kind of folks who went on, I believe, to have decent careers and got into, various things. And we were never, we never thought like, well, this is like a group that is impenetrable. And this sort of brings me like sort of to one half of this question, the career path for a database administrator. I think what's interesting to me is that so many people I know who get into, sort of data careers. Database administrator is an interesting title. Talk about that in a second. But getting into this, like, every community, every database community that I've ever seen, SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, it doesn't matter. There is always a talk. There's always a blog post. This is like the accidental DBA. Every community has one of these because so many people just get into this by accident, right? Like they don't go to school, they don't go to CMU and study databases and then run databases for a career. It's like more likely they went to some other school and studied like chemistry, and then needed to do some kind of analysis. So they put their data in a database, and then they started writing maybe some Python, but maybe some SQL. Then they had to manage that data, and blammo, next thing you know, they're a database administrator. And that's that's basically how I got into it. It was like when I started doing web development way back in the day, in the before times, so many before times. Like if you want to do web development, that was the real full stack web development where you install the operating system and it was Linux, and you spun up Apache and you loaded your PHP module and you spun up your database. And then, so you were system administrator, developer, and DBA all at the same time. And so that's how it worked for us. So, it didn't bother me to deal with that. And then in different teams that I worked on, basically like I was the guy who was willing to spend time on the database stuff. Right, like I liked it, so it didn't bother me to do that. And other people didn't seem to like it as much. They didn't like SQL, or they didn't like the ops stuff, or whatever. And so that's just how I got into it. Coming really from a completely different, I was doing web development and like UI and usability and all that stuff, and ended up being really a more data oriented career. So I think that's what I say. There's a lot of ways you can get into this kind of work. If you're willing to just sort of take accountability for the database stuff, you'll become a database administrator before you know it. And that can be, that again, like I knew some sysadmins Like if you were a sysadmin who was willing to fire up, like PSQL or the MySQL command line tool or something, and like go in the database and write queries to, just to look at statistics information. Like if you were willing to do that, like blammo, you could have a database career if you wanted, right? That's all it really took. So many people get into it that kind of way that it's odd for me to even think of it as a career path in that sense. And the other part I think also is like that title of database administrator, like that can mean a lot of different things in different companies. Whether you're sort of the more operational DBA who's dealing with like spinning up systems and backups and restores and replication and that kind of stuff. If you're like an application DBA, so you're helping people write queries. Maybe you're doing performance and troubleshooting of queries that are in the application. There's folks that are doing like report writing. That can often be, I've seen that where like even they own their own sort of database that is taking exports of the production database and then doing report writing against that, writing complex SQL queries with data analysis and whatnot. And so that, and that would be different from like a data analyst position. I guess the difference there is you write Python instead of SQL. Right. So there's just a lot of space. And again, these, a career, you say, like the job, the two things I did the most, like sort of at the end of my time of doing that type of work, as sort of the full-time person, was basically like query troubleshooting, performance troubleshooting, that kind of a thing, where like we have this problem query, often it's already in production. How do we make this go better? And the version of the answer that everybody wanted was, oh, we'll just run analyze and that solves it, right? And then you look like the hero, but it could be indexes, it could be rewrite the query, it could be you got to restructure your data, like who knows, right? It could be all those things. So I did a lot of that kind of work. And then the other thing was actually the architecture, like how to build out and do replication or whatever and meet sort of business goals from that side. So you could specialize, I think, in either of those things. Certainly like distributed systems and replication is, it is a field of study unto itself. So you can definitely specialize in that as a thing if you want to specialize in a particular area for a career. So that, and I guess I should also mention, like, in nowadays, if you're doing sort of the more agile or DevOps type stuff as an organization, you might be a database reliability engineer. Just sort of that sort of version of a database administrator career. And sort of understand that piece of it. So, to me, like I always think, like, they say, like, who's your target audience? Who are your people or your tribe or whatever? And I think the thing that most closely matches like my interests and hobbies of Postgres and data stuff with stuff I've worked on in a career is it's just sort of data practitioners, right? Like that group, but that's a wide group. It's sysadmins, it's DBAs, it's DBREs, it's web developers. Like it's if you're touching on data and whatnot, and probably, I guess, in my world, there's more open source data practitioners, but that's who I think of as like that. Those are the folks that I'm usually trying to talk to and trying to help out. There's folks who I would call them data practitioners, not just database administrators, because it's again, it's kind of they're very mushy terminologies when it comes to this stuff. So your career path, the summary to me is you want to have an interest in database technology and whatever the aspects are that you find interesting. I think the thing that really got me, initially it was just a tool, like writing SQL was fine. But there was a transitionary period I went through, which was writing advanced Excel spreadsheet macros and then writing SQL. And I thought writing SQL was better for what I wanted to, for data analysis that I was trying to do than like Excel spreadsheet macros. I just preferred the language of SQL over the other one. So that kind of sent me down that way. And then where it really got interesting to me was when I started learning like distributed systems. But I also, again, like go back and you've got to, this is what I recommend is like go back and read some of the stuff from Cod and Date. Fabian Pascal, I loved reading his stuff. Just sort of old school folks who talk about the relational model and some of the interesting pieces of that. And you'll see how that stuff carries forward through the decades. So if you're willing to be a learner and find the parts of database practitioner, that scope that you find interesting and just continually learn about it, that's number one. And number two is just be willing to take accountability for the database parts. And that's all you need, because most people just shy away from it. It's complicated, it's scary, like whatever the reasons, like that, they just, they come up with a reason they don't want to write SQL, whatever it is. Like people find reasons not to deal with databases. So if you are proactive and say, I'll take charge of that. I'll take responsibility for that. Like I think that goes a very long way in making a career for that. So probably the next thing, and the next question is going to touch on this is I was going to say don't narrow yourself to one particular database technology. You can actually do that, I think, for a career. Like if you want to be an Oracle DBA or Postgres DBA for your whole career, I think you can do that. In learning, though, I think there is a value in studying the other ones. So that's why I would say like look at these other ones and study them. So that brings me to the second question, which is what is the difference between an Oracle DBA and a PostgreSQL DBA? And can they perform their roles on database systems like MySQL or Postgres? So what the difference is, there's probably more of a difference between what company A and company B think a DBA should do than there is a difference between the needs of a role of somebody who is managing an Oracle system and the needs of a role of somebody managing a Postgres system. Now, I will say early on, so again, we're going to go back like 20 years in the Postgres ecosystem. To me, the folks that were the best sort of performance practitioners and understood performance tuning and benchmarking and whatnot were actually folks who came out of the Oracle space and had been doing it over there where they just had, years they had 20 plus years of people doing it on Oracle systems. So they really understood, somewhere on this wall is like my performance tuning book for Oracle, because like there just wasn't a thing that addressed that in the Postgres space back then. So that even predated high performance MySQL, which I also have somewhere over here. There's high performance MySQL still on the shelf. Great book, Baron Schwartz's book. There was a lot of good information in there, just on the nature of like how do you do performance troubleshooting in general, and sort of learning those pieces that I thought were good lessons to apply and take to that and take into the Postgres world. So now, obviously, the tooling is different, and it's sort of funny because I thought long ago. I probably still feel this way, that Oracle, I think, can definitely be overwhelming. The amount of information it gives you, the level of internal knowledge of Oracle that it does, there's a lot there. And I think when an Oracle person goes in the Postgres world, actually, I feel they probably are like, where is my information? Like, I cannot do the job because Postgres just doesn't give me that information. I think Postgres folks, like once they learn how to manage Postgres, they look at the Oracle stuff and they're like, there's too much information over there. Like, that's way too complicated. You don't need all that stuff, right? You're not going to need it. And so they are just like, it just gets in the way to have access to the information. So, that's mostly, I think, an aspect of like, what are you comfortable with and what have you learned to manage? But, be that as it may, again, like the needs of like, well, you need to have backups, right? You need to have recovery. You're probably going to have a replication solution. You need to learn SQL. You're going to have to learn how to optimize that SQL, which may mean rewriting SQL. You should understand indexes. The nature of those things, the very specifics will change, right? There are things like understanding how DDL works in transactional DDL in Postgres versus non-transactional DDL in Oracle, understanding flashback, which Oracle has, or phrasing query plans, which Oracle has, and probably you're not going to get that on Postgres. Understanding the different flavors of Postgres that are out there, right? If you're running in Azure versus AWS, or if you're running, Enterprise DB's Fork, or Neon or something like that versus like community Postgres. Like, so you understand there's different flavors. Like there's space in both of those that are like, you have to go learn those pieces, right? That are sort of like different implementations of the same idea, right? I've often used this thought that like databases are just high level abstraction over CPU, memory, and disk I/O, and nothing more than that. So you learn the abstraction, which is your database system, and then you go about trying to offset problems when they come up. And I think there's a lot of truth in that statement. Does this mean you can go from being an Oracle DBA to a Postgres DBA and do that job? Both yes and no. Like if you're thinking of it from a career standpoint or a job standpoint, then absolutely you can. I would say at least 50% of the people that I had hired into the OmniTI database team over the years came from non-Postgres backgrounds. And I always kind of looked at it as, I could always teach people how to do Postgres stuff. So if you knew how to run Oracle or you knew how to run MySQL, and you came in and we're going to have a job. We manage all of those, right? Like the very first project that I was on at OmniTI, like, day one of being hired there, was actually, my job was basically database administrator, and I was running Oracle, Postgres, and MySQL all involved. And, I knew where my strengths and weaknesses were. So I immediately started hiring a team to sort of offset, right, and build. That's what the team is for. But so that was, we could teach you the Postgres pieces, I think, better than we could teach any of the other stuff. But knowing the other stuff, I knew those other pieces generally well enough that I could come up with the right analogies or framework in the other thing of like translate it from over there to over here. And so I know people can make that leap. And a lot of those folks, and certainly, again, early days of Postgres, nowadays there are people who are like, they spent their whole career basically working with Postgres. That's kind of a thing now. But 20 years ago, Postgres was never anybody's first database, right? Like, maybe it was Access as much as anything else, but you probably came from Oracle or whatever, and they make the leap into Postgres and they never look back. And a lot of people did that and can do it. The only caveat I would say is if you're in management and you have this expectation of like, well, they know Oracle, so obviously they can do Postgres. Yes, but they're going to need training and they're going to need time, and there is a learning curve, right? If you have spent your life, fixing cars, fixing Japanese cars, and then you start working on American cars, like, first off, you have a whole different set of tools you need to get. Like I have a Miata, and most everything in that system is metric. Oddly, not everything, but most everything uses metric tools. So if I get an American built car, I've got to go get the standard English tools, right? For like wrenches and whatnot. Like, I know how a wrench works. I know how, a nut and a bolt works, but if you don't have the right tool, so you got to figure that out. And then there are specialty tools. Those little like star screwdriver things for the Miata where the clamps are for the roof. Like, that I think that's the only screws in the world that those work for, right? Like, there's those kinds of things that are hanging out there. So, and then if you go get like a Porsche or something, right? Like, get a German vehicle, and it's a yet a different experience. If you know how to work on cars, you can do the basics across, right? Like, I could probably do an oil change. Well, certainly, I don't know. New cars are weird, but any car from the like 90s and 2000s, I probably could do an oil change on any of those cars, right? Because I understand the basics of how to do an oil change. Doesn't mean I have the tools. Doesn't mean it wouldn't hurt to watch a YouTube video to see, like, here's where the filter is or whatever. Like, watch out for this when you change the filter. So anyways, I digress a little bit there. So if you're in management, just understand there's a learning curve, and you have to give people training and time to learn those processes. But they can make the leap if you need them to, as long as they're willing to do it. You try to force someone, that's a different story. They're probably going to go get another job, but it can be done. So, okay, so now the next question, I'm not exactly sure if there's a specific thing that drove this particular question, but here it is. So, what is the future of MongoDB? Will it be replaced by Postgres or MySQL in the near future? And if so, why? So I don't think what is prompting this question. I know some people who are into like tech and the stock market. I'm one of those people, but I think most people pay no attention to the stock market that are working in tech. And if you do pay attention, then you know that like the MongoDB stock price has just dropped like a rock over the last 6 months or so. And can't say I pay enough attention to their corporate status to say that they're in trouble or not in trouble, or I don't think they've fired anyone or anything. So I think they're doing okay as far as I know. I don't want to like freak anybody out. If I'm wrong about that, I guess drop a comment. But I think that the company is doing okay. It's just it's had a real big decline in the stock price, and they've got like an earnings call coming up in must be another like month or a month and a half probably. So hopefully things look good on that call, and doesn't go further down. And so, but I don't know if like that's prompting people to be worried about like what MongoDB is all about. I assume they're going to be there. So first, I would say that even in the worst case scenarios, and they're a special flavor of the worst case scenario. But in the worst case scenario, what I always say is like, if you ask me about any particular database and you say, what's the minimum amount of time I have before that database goes away? I will tell you 5 years. And if you ask me 6 months from now, I will tell you 5 years, because my assumption is that somewhere there's a production system that is running, and data systems tend to be so sticky that like probably you need another 5 years before you can expect that thing to go away. So if it's running in production today, give it 5 years before it'll completely go away. Now, I will say that in the Mongo case, maybe that's a little bit different, only because so much of their business is like the cloud Atlas stuff, and so if you're in a Mongo cloud situation, this is not a Mongo thing. If the only way to access your provider is through a cloud-based system, then if that goes away, right, then like that could go away much more quickly, right? It could be like a 90-day thing. I'm trying to remember who somebody just went out like the other day, and they were like, "Yeah, we're done. You got 30 days or 90 days or something to get your data off our system," because they got bought by somebody, right? And so we're shutting it down. So, so in that kind of scenario, right? And in this case, you don't really have an easy alternative to port your data to. Potentially, you could port it over to the old open source versions of Mongo, but who knows whether or not that would actually work. Much less so than if you were doing, if you're doing like RDS, and suddenly Amazon goes out of business, which I can't imagine that actually happening. But going from RDS to like community Postgres, super simple, easy to do. Now there could be some other Postgres forks and whatnot that wouldn't be quite as easy to do. So it's a factor you've got to consider when you're building architecture. But and I would say building a career, you might want to think about that as well. But by and large, like I think that's less of a risk. Now, is anybody actually working on replacing MongoDB? As far as I know, in the MySQL camp, that's not a thing that anybody's really working on. There's two pieces to that. I think if you want to be a Mongo replacement, and the first one is the actual JSON storage and indexing capabilities. And Postgres does have that. I think MySQL does have JSON storage capabilities. I don't really think they have indexing that matches what Postgres and Mongo can do. So I think you would have to actually address that first if you wanted to go after that market. And I don't get the impression that Oracle really does. So, I don't see that as being a thing. The other piece of it is you need to work on the front end sort of protocol piece, which is like what the application talks to, right? So applications that are written in whatever it's Mongo query language, I think, right? Either MQL or, through the Mongo API. If you have an application that's written to talk to Mongo, there is a thing on the Postgres side, which I think there might be more than one, but the one I'm familiar with is Ferret DB. If you have a Mongo system, it basically acts as a proxy that translates Mongo dialect into Postgres dialect, which is a heck of a translation. But it does that work for you. So you have the indexing and the storage. This allows you to actually have a translation layer so you don't have to rewrite applications. And that's Ferret DB. So that is out there in the world. I don't believe there's anything like that on the MySQL side. Again, because I don't think it's a problem that Oracle is interested in solving. Oracle might more likely just buy MongoDB if they wanted to do something in that space than to build a replacement for it. That's my thought. Don't know if anybody else is thinking about that, but that's just my thought. So anyways, but again, like, is that something that I think is going to happen right away, that everybody's going to move off of Mongo and move to Ferret and Postgres? Like, I mean, I don't see that. Like, there are workloads that are moving, and I'm sure some people are into that, but I can't see, like, it's not like in the next 6 months, like Mongo is going to be done and Ferret's going to have taken all their workloads. Like, it's a much more long-term process than that. If you only know MongoDB, and I will say that I get annoyed. There are boot camps out there that teach people the MERN stack. And I just, like, it's such a disservice to somebody that if you're going to learn database technology in some kind of boot camp system, you absolutely 100% like need to have a boot camp that's going to teach you SQL databases. It doesn't even have to be Postgres. Like, if they are like, well, we teach you everything with SQLite, that's fine. Like, but you have to learn SQL as a storage technology. And if they're not teaching you that, then they're not on your side, basically. I don't know any other way to put it. That's, just as simple as that. They don't care about your career, because there's no possible way that your career is better served by learning Mongo than it would be learned by learning SQL, right? Like SQL is a massive industry standard across all kinds of databases. And so it's both like ridiculous on the one level, like something, you have to laugh at a thing because otherwise like you just get so frustrated by it. So watch out for that. If the only thing you've ever dealt with is Mongo, like, yeah, I probably would say you should branch out a little bit and go look at some other stuff. And I would probably recommend something SQL based. I mean, obviously I'm biased, so I'm going to say go learn some Postgres, spin up VerityDB and take a little play with it or whatever, right? Like that's not a bad idea. And maybe that's an easier bridge to get you there. But that's worth doing. But even if not that, like go look at, something like Dynamo or whatever. Like it's so maybe a little more complementary in the skill set. It's good to have more than one when, essentially you're tied to a proprietary database at this point, right? Mongo and Mongo Inc. And as goes Mongo Inc. goes that whole ecosystem. So at least for now, that's how it is. So, but I also would say, like, I don't think you got to freak out or panic about it, because if your company is deeply invested in Mongo, like, again, what are your plans for getting off of that? If nobody's talked about it, then you definitely got time on your side, and I don't see them going away, in a real sense, anytime soon. So hopefully, I don't think that's uplifting necessarily, but I think it's practical and useful. So take that, for what it is. Last question, and this one also, I kind of like this one. It's fair question. I don't have a great answer for it, which is, how do I master SQL queries? And again, like I think it kind of depends on what you mean by how do you master SQL queries. Like, what do you mean by master in this case? If what you're saying is like, how do I learn how to write, more complex SQL? I think there's a lot of sort of resources out there. I would probably start with things that are a little more fun, like Advent of Code type stuff, where they do like this, like, can you do those in SQL? There's a few guys like Vic Fearing, Greg Mullane, I think also does those most years. So look at what those guys are doing as far as like writing complicated SQL. I enjoyed the Selco books. I think those are worth, giving a read. It's really hard if you're not actually using them for real problems. I think that's always the, one of the tricks of trying to learn any kind of programming, but writing SQL as well, I think is a little bit tricky. If you can find a data set that you're particularly interested in, and try to write more complicated answers to, questions that you can come up with, is also an idea. I do like what there's a little Stack Overflow community that people write queries against various Stack Overflow databases, answering questions that they're interested in, and they publish the schema and whatnot. I kind of ran across that as I was doing the Think Like a Postgres talk. So that's another area that you could go look at as something to do to learn more complex things. I don't know how much you have to master it in that sense. I would say you want to learn, use the index. Luke is like blasting in my head of like, don't say it. Don't say just learn SQL 92 and you're good. Yeah, Mark is going to yell at me for that. But if you learn the basics, right, the basic select stuff, and then I think the next sort of level up is like learn with queries, especially in Postgres. They're pretty powerful in Postgres. I don't even think you have to learn recursive queries. I don't think you really have to learn window functions. I say that because like I can't write those off the top of my head. I just don't write them very often. So if you said, can you write me a report that is based on that? Like, yeah, I can do it. Like, I'll go pull up the Postgres docs and look at the language. And I probably will go pull up, I've got a couple of notes. I'm like, go read this article every time you need to go write a window function, right? Like, so if you're doing any of that, like partition by over rows, whatever, like any of that stuff, SQL nerd stuff, like it's good to be able to do that stuff. And if your job is writing reports in SQL, then absolutely you're going to go learn that stuff and you'll know it like the back of your hand. That's great. I don't think you have to know that for so many of the data-oriented jobs that are out there. You don't need to know that level of it. Just don't be scared of it when it comes up. Just be like, okay, I'm going to go back to the docs and refer to those, and I'll jump in there. Now, maybe what you mean in sort of trying to master SQL queries is the performance side. In which case, like then I think you need to get a pretty decent understanding. If you really want that, I don't know what is it, 500 level knowledge, where you're the Jedi Master person. Uh, if that's what you're aiming for, then I think on your chosen database platform or platforms, like you actually have to get into the internals enough to understand like what is the nature of the relationship when the database system is trying to answer the query. What is it actually trying to do, and how do we make that work? So that you can, you got to learn the explain tool, you got to learn how to do indexing, you got to understand which way the queries go one way or the other, and do all that kind of stuff. So that is sort of the other thing. And again, that's also difficult to do without sort of real world stuff. One thing you can do, I think, if you're in a big enough company where there's a Slack, you probably, I would say, join like the PGSQL performance mailing list. There's a lot of problems like that, and see how other people approach these problems. We don't get a lot of those on the Postgres Slack. I felt like we used to get them more in IRC, but we do get some where people come in with performance questions, and so that would be another place sort of to hang out. If you're in a larger company, where there are people that are using SQL, and you just sort of let it be known, hey, I'm trying to get better at performance tuning. If you have a performance tuning problem, with regards to the database, like please let me know. Or if you are allowed to create like a Slack channel in your company Slack or whatever, right, where you're like, we're just going to call it like, Postgres SQL performance tuning. You see what I did there, right? If you just call it that, and you go hang out and you tell people like, hey, you have problems tuning your queries, come in, drop the SQL, and we'll see what we can do to fix it. To sort of build up that muscle, right? Like that's with so many things. Like part of it is you got to get exposure to a wide variety, and you got to build up muscles over time, with this kind of thing. So and get that knowledge. So that would kind of be my suggestions on getting better at SQL queries. So. Okay, it's been a long one. That's a bunch of career advice boiled into something. Hopefully that's useful. Maybe I should turn all that into a conference talk. Speaking of conference talks, the perfect segue. You may have noticed I'm wearing my past Data Summit hat from last year. I'm going to be back at past Data Summit this year, doing another talk on Postgres internals for practitioners, about how the internal engine works. We're going to talk more about indexes. If you saw my talk from last year, Think Like a Postgres is sort of like a part 2 of that, where we'll talk a little bit more about how indexes work and the interplay there. So you can, of course, go watch the first piece. I think you can get it from past the one that I did there. There's a rough version of it on my YouTube channel if you want to watch that one as well. So you can do that. Past Data Summit is in Seattle, Washington. It is in November. I know I'm going to Seattle in November. I survived it last year. I feel like I can survive it again this year. I still have a big, thick jacket that I don't ever wear unless I leave the state of Florida, and I'll be taking that with me. So I do hope to see you there. As a bonus, if you are going, I have a discount code that you can use. It is TREATR24. And you get $150 off your registration. So be sure to use that and secure you the bag, I guess is what the kids say. That's TREAT R24. Treat R24 is the coupon code for that. So I'll drop that in the show notes as well. So that's it for today. Like I said, it's a little bit longer one, but we're talking about your career, man. You got to invest a little extra time to make these things work. That's going to wrap it up, though. I will let you get on with your Saturdays. And if you got this far, thanks for watching. Remember, as always, take care of yourself. And if you can, take care of your database as well. And I will see you in the next one. Cheers.